Morning, everyone, and thank you, Dr. McQueen, for such a generous introduction. I think the reason that you liked Sesame Workshop during the 70s is because when I was working on those programs, you were probably in the target audience as a child watching those programs. So thank you for reminding me about my aging career. I want to make it clear I was 10 years old when I was working on those shows. But it's just great to be here at your first Summer Alumni Summit. I think it's a great idea to bring back the alums, and I've been saying that your connection to your academic program, to your university, is one of the most important relationships that you have. Certainly as you look back, if you're a younger alum or an older alum, it's one of the primary relationships that we have, the place where we learn, certainly for those of you in education. So I will point out that I did my graduate work in communication and education at Stanford, graduate work, and Stanford has never invited us back to campus for a reunion. So Dean McQueen, you are far ahead of the Dean of Humanities and Sciences at Stanford in thinking about this is a good opportunity. In fact, several of us are self-organizing our own reunion this fall for the first time in about 30 years. Well, it's a pleasure to be here and to share some ideas with you about the future of education. And I'm just looking at the clock. What I will try to do is make some remarks and show you some videos. Because we do like to show video, that's what we do at edutopia.org. Working for a filmmaker, Mr. Lucas, we make films about innovative teaching and learning, and we started about 20 years ago. And I remember a time when I started there around 1997, 98, where the way in which you shared a video was you made a VHS cassette. And I would go to conferences and I would say, if you want to see this video, I cannot show it to you, but it's on a VHS cassette in the back of the room. Please pick one up on your way out. You could put it in your VCR, which is probably still blinking 12 o'clock noon. Back in the day when I was working at a PBS station called KQED, we used to broadcast what we call instructional television. I know you've had that here in Tennessee. I know I'm looking around this room. Some of you may have actually used what we call instructional television in the classroom. It was not easy to use. You had to either find a TV set and get it turned on and get the rabbit ears pointed in the right direction. Some of you who are younger, I think, are wondering, what is this? What is he talking about? You could only watch a program at the time that it was broadcast. That's what I'm trying to make. So we came up with this innovation of let's broadcast these programs overnight so educators can record them on their VCRs. That way they can play, they'll have that VHS tape, they can play it as long as they want, whenever they want. So if they're teaching science in April and our science program's on in September, they'll be able to do that. I talked with educators about this. We didn't make it easy because you would have to figure out how to set your VCR timer. And you would have to have a PhD in engineering to figure this out. I once talked with a teacher. She said, that is great what you're doing, broadcasting overnight so we can have these cassettes. She said, but I haven't figured out how to set that timer. So the program starts at 2 a.m. What I do is I set my alarm clock for 2 a.m. It wakes me up, I run over to the VCR, press record, and I go back to sleep. So teachers have always been very inventive about how they use materials, find materials, and I'm reminded of that a lot by that comment. I've been very fortunate in my career to have started at Sesame Street, at Sesame Workshop in New York. This fall you will be able to see the 45th season of Sesame Street. This is a program that's gone around the world. As other nations have seen what we've done with our program here, they said, we have preschoolers too. We don't have child care centers. We don't have trained early childhood educators. If we could reach them and their parents with this content about early learning, letters and numbers, literacy, that would be great because we can reach them through television. So this program, as you can see it, as you go around the world in Latin America, Plaza Sésamo, it's the World Cup. If you're in Brazil, you can see Vila Sésamo in Portuguese, a Portuguese version of Sesame Street. We're on in Asia, China, Japan, South Korea, and in South Africa as well. In the Middle East, there are versions of Sesame Street in Arabic. So that's been the great success of Sesame Street, to circle the globe. We like to call it the longest street in the world. And then I was working on the East Coast during my 20s with that work, and now have worked on the West Coast with Mr. Lucas, who was also a visionary. Much like Joan Cooney, the founder of Sesame Street, George also understood the power of media and technology to reach children, to make teaching more engaging. So I've got one eye on the clock. There's so many things I want to do, but the one thing I will do is to show you an example of how education and learning can be more engaging. What Sesame Street has taught us is that we can use music, we can use animation, we can use art, characters, puppets, to make this much more interesting and engaging, not just for young kids, now they're starting at 2, 3, 4-year-olds, but also for their parents. You may have seen in Sesame Street that's kind of a 2-level program, isn't it? You'll see some segments that are intended to teach kids about the alphabet. There'll be a song called The Letter B, but it's a parody of a Beatles song called Let It Be. And those of you who are parents, as you're watching that program, now grandparents, watching that program, when you see that, it connects with you as well. I like some of these topics you've got today at your Alumni Summit, where you're going to learn about how technology can make learning more engaging. Sarah Duncan's doing a talk on the joyful classroom. Isn't that nice? Think about a joyful classroom for teachers and for students. Teaching and learning should be joyful. I like putting together words that you often don't hear these days. In this whole conversation about the Common Core standards, I know you're actively involved in implementing that. I wish someone would say, hey, let's find a way to make this joyful for our students and for our teachers. It shouldn't be hard work. Hard work is involved, but there should be engagement. There should be an interest in doing this. So I like to use these sort of words. And one of my favorite books, by the way, is a book called Education and Ecstasy. 2 words that have never been used before in education. Education with ecstasy, is that possible? George Leonard wrote this book more than 30 years ago. He passed away a few years ago. But take a look at it, Education and Ecstasy. And you'll see the beginnings. I think he was a Look magazine reporter on education. But he had this idea, and it's the right idea, that education can be more joyful. That we're meant to learn. We are wired to learn. Every student is wired to learn at birth. And we need to continue that interest in learning. Those of you who are involved with preschoolers as educators or parents or grandparents, you know they're constantly asking questions. They want to learn. They're using all of their senses to learn. I sometimes say we need to have students come back to their senses in their learning. And I mean that both literally and figuratively, to use all of their senses, their entire bodies, to learn the way in which preschoolers learn. These are some of the lessons I learned early in my career at Sesame Street, and I've carried them forward for the next 40 years, really. That we need to use our entire bodies to learn. Some of you may have seen Sir Ken Robinson's talk on the TED Talks. He's one of the most popular speakers, a British arts educator. He says the problem in education is we somehow think that we're just educating kids from the neck up. We've forgotten that they have a body, they like to use their hands, they like to move, they like to dance, they like to sing. So I do believe that we need to think of the learner as their entire use of their senses and whole child, whole body learning. I will just say a word about how fortunate I am to have had this career. Not just to have worked in these places, to have learned these lessons, that kids can learn more earlier than we think they can if we give them the right experiences. I learned that watching 3, 4, and 5-year-olds at Sesame Street. I believe that of all kids, that we can now accelerate their learning with some of these new tools, these new experiences. But here, I include this photo because I've been very fortunate to have grown up in the United States and had this career. My parents came from China at the end of World War II. There's a brief little window where my parents could come to the US from China, the only ones from their families to come here. At the end of World War II, remember the history, China and the US were allies, fighting the Japanese. The US welcomed Chinese students to come to America, so my father came. And then a little civil war broke out in China in the late 40s, the communists and the nationalists, and my mother was making her way south as the communists were beginning to look like they were going to win the war. And in '49, she was on a boat from Hong Kong to San Francisco. October 1st, 1949 is, as we're coming up on our July 4th, our Independence Day. October 1st is the red letter day in China. That's when the communists won that war. And they got a little telegram on that boat that said, congratulations, it's good news. The Civil War's over. There's going to be this new country called the People's Republic of China. And my mother and father didn't know what that meant, but what it did mean was that little window that opened for my father and mother to come here closed very rapidly, pretty much on October 1st, 1949. If you were a Chinese person in the US wanting to go back to China, you would be in for a very difficult time. So my parents decided to stay. My sister was born a few years after that. I was born a few years after that. So I've been very fortunate to have grown up in this country. When I compare my life here, the education I've had, the experiences I've had working in the 70s and the 80s, when China, of course, was having the most difficult time. I've been very fortunate, and in the last decade of my career, I want to do more on this US-China relationship. I think it's very important for both countries to learn to coexist peacefully, to learn to collaborate more, cooperate more. I think this is the most important relationship for both countries, the most important bilateral relationship for both countries, and in fact for the world. You can see ways in which this relationship could go well, and you can see ways in which it could not go well. So I'm trying to work with a number of groups, and I hope more of you will also say, yeah, I think this is an important relationship, the rise of Asia and the rise of China. This is our website. How many of you have maybe been to edutopia.org this year, maybe? Yeah, it's amazing that this website is now attracting more than 1 million visitors every month. I remember when we started it, when we got the web traffic, and we said, my gosh, 10,000 people came to our website this month. Isn't that amazing? But I think Mr. Lucas, I credit him with saying, there's going to be a time, and he said this back in the 90s, there's going to be a time coming when educators, people, not just in this country, but around the world, will be able to see our films over the internet. YouTube, of course, has made this possible. I think YouTube's only about 8 or 9 years old this year. But back then, it was a big leap to say, really? You don't have to get that VHS cassette? You don't have to get that DVD? Our website is full of information about innovations such as student entrepreneurship, this idea of helping students learn to think creatively, create new products and services. They can be doing that here in Tennessee. They can be doing that around the country. And this holds a key to the future economy. This is the kind of education we want kids to have. We've also, through a partnership with Pearson Foundation, we've made some films about classrooms in other countries. We hear a lot about Finland. We hear a lot about Singapore. These smaller countries, more homogeneous countries. I will credit them with great leadership. But they are smaller and able to make change happen more quickly. And as you talk with them, when they have these amazing teachers, they have this more creative curriculum. When we ask them, well, how did you do that? They said, we just studied you. We just studied the best schools in the US. Because the best schools in the US that offer this kind of creative, more innovative, project-based curriculum, that's what the rest of the world wants. So they're learning from us. I hope there's no one here from Finland or Singapore, because if they understood things like the after-school movement, I know you've got after-school programs here in Tennessee, more learning time, how we're taking advantage of summer learning for kids. If they hear that, they will make sure that every kid in Finland and Singapore has after-school programs, has summer learning, is using technology. I wrote this book called Education Nation about leading edges of innovation in our schools. And I really posed the question, what would it be like to have an education nation? What would it be like to have a country that prized education and saw the connection between education and the economy? When our leaders talk about the economy and jobs and all the markets and all that, I wish in the next sentence they would say, and improving this depends on education. Some leaders in other countries understand this because, for instance, in South Korea, they say, we don't have natural resources. We're not a nation blessed like the United States with oil and gas, with minerals, with gold. Our only natural resource is our people. So we invest in our people. And now you see Samsung and LG, and some of you might be driving a Kia. So they do understand the importance of human development and education and the connection to their future workforce. Some of them believe it so strongly they put images of children learning on their currency. Here's some currency from Taiwan. Here's some currency from Singapore. Think of the images that we put on our currency. Somehow, these leaders, when they thought about a new kind of currency for their nations, they said, what do we want to put on our currency that would reflect who we are as a nation? And they said, we believe in children learning. So it's just one indication sometimes that some leaders are thinking about, at the highest levels, about their children learning. So we're not quite an education nation yet. I think many of you in education are knowledgeable about these statistics. I'll just point to the first one, this reading gap that opens up very early. The 4th grade reading hurdle, which is still a hurdle for many students, that doesn't start in 4th grade, it starts in 1st grade. In fact, it starts at birth. Of the 50 first graders behind in reading, 44 are still behind at 4th grade. But in fact, this research that we're hearing about of parent-child speech starting with infants and toddlers, this 10 million word gap, some research done by Hart and Risley that's got a lot of attention. But if you look at what they did was they recorded everything, and I don't know how they did this in the age before digital technology. They recorded everything that parents said to their children during the first couple of years. Before the children were verbal, they just recorded parent speech. And what they found out was there was a more than 10 million word gap at the 2 or 3 year old level. Some preschoolers had heard much more speech from their parents, some had heard much less. And what was interesting about this was that more educated parents, it was not so much defined by income but by education, more educated parents spoke with their children in a different way. They gave them more positive utterances than negative. Much more, by a factor of 4 to 1. They were always saying encouraging things. You know, listen to this, and let's look at this together, and let me explain this to you. Not so much on the negative, don't do this. That's wrong. You know, I'm mad at you. But the less educated parents, it was just the reverse. They made many more negative utterances towards their preschoolers than positive ones. So this gap opens up, and we've been dealing with it for decades now. Here's a role for technology, because now we can actually record on a little device what parents say to their children. In some cities, in Providence, for instance, and you can look up an NPR report on this just in the past year or two, these devices give feedback to parents about how much they're talking to their kids. And some of the parents can say, oh, I haven't spoken with my kid enough today. And this is not just for preschoolers, but throughout. So some of you I know are active physically and you're recording how many steps you're taking, the pedometer and all these new devices that are watches, things on your sneakers, recording your physical activity, recording your heartbeat. We can now do that in education. We can record and give data back to ourselves about speech, about how much we're talking. It can take, and I'll show you an example that's coming up, it can take language and translate it into other languages. It's an amazing time that we're living in for teaching and learning. So we're beginning to find ways that technology can support and give us feedback on actually what we're doing and saying. Here's our strength, and this is why I hope that there's no one from Finland and Singapore here, because we have this amazing network of informal education institutions, starting with our public libraries. Thank you, Andrew Carnegie. Our public libraries in every community. Our universities, Lipscomb being a great example of how you're partnering with schools. We have educational media. We have museums. These are the envy of other countries. And now the informal education sector, the time that kids have outside of school, is partnering with schools to extend that learning time. Evenings, weekends, and summers. I'm a big fan of summer learning. I call it the third semester. I hope some of your students are still learning during the summer. That's why we have that long summer vacation now. We want them to learn. It used to be we had the long summer vacation because they were supposed to be bringing in the crops. How many of your students are actually harvesting the crops in August? What are our students doing during the summer? So the rise of summer learning programs through libraries, museums, nonprofit organizations, churches as well. I'll describe these 6 edges of innovation, then I want to show you a film that brings them all together. Changing our thinking about this is the most important edge. I gave my first talk based on my book 4 years ago in Orlando to the Florida Teachers of the Year, and I described these edges, and they voted with clickers on these edges on the most important edge. We talked about changing our thinking. We talked about changes to curriculum and assessment, the role of technology. The internet is our tool for learning now. All the information that our kids need to know is out there. We need to help them find it. Learning time and place, I've mentioned that. Creating more learning time and place. The US has one of the shortest school years of any industrialized nation. About 180 days, is that true here in Nashville? About 180 days. Most countries have a school year of at least 200 days. I was just at a project-based learning conference in California, and there were 4 teachers from China there. And I said, well, are you going to spend some time traveling? There's our first trip to the United States. And see a bit of California, and they said, no, we have to go back and teach. We have 2 more weeks of teaching, and we have a whole week of assessment and professional development. We don't finish until mid-July. Co-teaching is this idea of team teaching, teachers working together. This was a time-honored practice, but it's gone by the wayside a bit during No Child Left Behind. Co-teaching with other experts, with community members, bringing in writers and artists into the classroom. This tends to happen mostly in the elementary grades, but it's so important as we're trying to create more STEM learning, to bring in scientists and engineers, to give that practical, real-life experience to our students. So teachers forming these partnerships with other community members and companies and universities. And that last edge of our youth, our digital learners who want to learn in a new way, in a more collaborative way, a more joyful way. So these Florida Teachers of the Year voted on these 6, and which edge do you think they thought was the most important by a long shot? Any guesses? I would think technology. That's an important edge, an important force. It's changing how we can teach and learn. Information now is always on 24/7, 365. They voted for thinking. 2/3 of them said that's the most important edge. If you understand and think in a different way about what this can be now, a lot of these other edges come along with it, including technology. I think we're living in a time when you can talk about not just learning anytime, any place. We know this. We've had this in place for a long time. But what about any path, any pace? Is it possible to give students multiple paths based on their interest, their background, their engagement, what they want to learn? Can we organize almost an individualized educational plan for each student? Can the teacher, aided by technology, begin to monitor this individually and in small groups to take students through different learning paths? Not just everybody learning the same thing at the same time in the same way, which has been our model before the age of the internet and before this approach to collaborative, cooperative learning. And what about any pace? Is it possible to vary the pace at which students learn? Some students may need more time to learn certain things. Other students may need less time to learn certain things. Can we vary the pace? For the longest time, we've held time constant. You know, schools operate 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, 180 days a year. That's it. You have that amount of time to learn that curriculum for the 4th grade or the 8th grade. But can we vary the pace? Can some students start behind grade level when they come out in September and master that curriculum, say in 4th grade, and start on the 5th grade all within 1 year? We have many examples of this, more accelerated approach to learning on edutopia.org. And it's in part aided by what they can do with technology, how technology can give them feedback more quickly. So learning any path, any pace. I want to show you an example of one film that brings together a lot of these ideas and also gives us a way of thinking about the Common Core, and it's about the arts. as we're looking at the Common Core in English language arts and in math, I hope we're also looking for ways to involve the arts in achieving Common Core standards. If I told you that there's a school in Arizona, in Tucson, with a fair number of English language learners, these kids, again, start the year behind grade level. During the year, they meet grade level and start on the next grade in literacy. And they do it through the arts. And they do it through an art form that is hard to believe, which is opera. When I first heard about this, I said, well, how can that be true? Opera is something that's sung in a foreign language. And it's, you go down and you dress up to the opera house and you sit and listen to this, and it's a great experience, but how does that help a third grader? This is why we make films, because if I had to explain this to you, you wouldn't believe it. It would take me a long time to explain it to you. But in 4 or 5 minutes, please look at this school from Tucson, Arizona. It's a program called Opening Minds for the Arts, and it has a lot to do with kids learning language by performing it. Here's how it works. They're using their entire bodies to learn. They're performing language, and this is so important. And you see how much the students want to do this, that they want to sing, they want to perform, and they're using all their senses to do it. The reason that girl knows the word exuberant is because she knows what it looks like on paper, but also what it looks like on a person's face, what it feels like to be exuberant. So this is the key to getting over that 4th grade reading hurdle. It's using the arts to perform language. And as the teachers said, when they started the school year, the students could barely write a word or two, but by mid-year she had sentences, she had paragraphs. Given the right experiences, kids can learn more quickly than we've given credit for. I like Seymour Papworth's phrase that technology can be wheels for the mind. Technology can help us learn more quickly, again, especially by giving us feedback and showing us what we're learning. Run through a few more slides, and I want to move to some of your questions and comments around 10 o'clock. I never want to give a talk about education without reminding ourselves about the multiple ways in which we're smart. The 8 ways in which all people are intelligent. Not just the first 2, again, which are emphasized in our tests and emphasized in our Common Core standards, but can we connect the other 6 ways to the Common Core standards, as we just saw through opera, through music, through the bodily kinesthetic, to achieve the learning in the language arts and to achieve the learning in mathematics. Believe me, there are ways of visualizing mathematics using the visual intelligence and also the movement, the kinesthetic intelligence to help students do better in math. I like that last intelligence, the naturalist intelligence, because in the first book that Professor Gardner wrote, he only mentioned the first 7. And he did a little more research, and he said, there's another one. It's called the naturalist intelligence. The definition of these intelligences was that they had to be located in the brain, so the neuroscience is revealing this as well. There are parts of the brain that are activated by these intelligences, and activated more by when we use them multiply, when we use music and visual intelligence to learn math or to learn the language arts. He said there's another one, and it's people who are good in nature. They're good with plants and animals. This is a kind of intelligence, and I'm sure many of you have this intelligence in this room. We have made a number of films and covered a number of schools that are doing things like school gardens. And kids come alive in the school garden. And sometimes it's the kids who are not traditionally good at the verbal or math, but in the school garden, they exhibit what they know. They just love interacting with nature, and through that they can learn more math, they can learn more science, but they need that experience, they need that environment to do it. Okay. Here's what happens if we don't emphasize the multiple intelligences, because here lies Frederick Jones, and here are his SAT scores, which are actually pretty good. But we want our students to be more than the sum of their SAT scores. Yeah, I'm sure we got into a very good college. As part of this thinking edge, we want to talk about a new vocabulary for learning, for education. Some new schools, and we're in the middle of a new school building construction boom now, the economy's picking up. Some of the schools, I'm looking around this room, some of you like me, baby boomers coming through. We went to new schools because our parents were coming out of World War II and having us. So in the 60s and 70s, we went to a number of new schools. It's 40 years later. Those schools we went to are in need of renovation, reconstruction, and redesign. And so we're in the middle of a huge school building boom. And some of these schools that have a chance to rethink the space, we have a fair amount of content on our site about what would a 21st century school or learning center, let's call it a learning center, be like? How would the space be different? It might look a little bit more like this in terms of tables and chairs that are portable and move around with technology. Maybe teachers should call themselves not just instructors giving information, but more mentors and coaches and team leaders. Maybe students should be called team members or even scholars, because scholars go to college, don't they? Maybe changing the wording would help more students think about themselves and their path to college. And also, teachers should no longer be the solo practitioner. Teaching is one of the last professions now where individuals work on their own. Just about any other place you can imagine. Ad agency, manufacturing, technology, a hospital. You see teams of people working together and communicating and often using technology to record their collaboration. Can we bring that to teaching as well? Can we have teachers become team collaborators, working with each other, and as I mentioned, working with other experts in the community and even online? When I talk about the curriculum edge, I like to focus on one of those bullets, which is social emotional learning. Now, in the standard curriculum, it's rarely mentioned. We talk about math, we talk about science, you know what we talk about in curriculum. We're beginning to talk about globalizing the curriculum, that's important. But what about social and emotional learning? How does that fit in with the regular curriculum? We've covered a lot of these social emotional learning, SEL programs at Edutopia. You can see films about it. What we're beginning to realize, based on the research, is that the SEL supports the academic learning. It's not time taken away from learning science and math and history. It actually improves the learning of science and math and history if kids come ready to learn. If they know how to communicate respectfully, if they know how to deal with their own feelings and emotions they're bringing into the classroom from problems they may have had in their family, in their neighborhoods. So SEL, there's been some very good research, and we reported at Edutopia. Please look up the Collaborative for Social and Emotional Learning, Academic Social and Emotional Learning at casel.org, castle.org. They're a research group based in Chicago that's done a very rigorous analysis of SEL programs showing that when schools implement these programs, the test scores rise, on average higher than just about anything else these school districts have tried. On average, an 11-point increase in test scores. Not that we think test scores are the only measure. Tests still matter. I want to say the tests still matter, but they're only part of the picture. But if you take that part of the picture, the test scores rise because kids are, importantly, as it says, learning to collaborate, learning to communicate. And this connects, I think, to the spiritual tradition here at Lipscomb. There's a moral and ethical aspect to social emotional learning. Kids learning to get along together. It involves anti-bullying programs as well. So I like to talk about SEL, and I like what Roger Weisberg at Castle says. Whenever he talks to school districts about the importance of SEL, and sometimes they say, you know, we're trying to implement the Common Core over here, and the plate's full, just getting to the Common Core. We can't add anything to the plate right now. Roger Weisberg likes to say, perhaps I wasn't clear. This isn't adding something to the plate. This is the plate. This is the plate on which you can build everything else you're trying to do with Common Core and getting to better assessments and improving test scores. But unless there is this foundation of kids feeling good about themselves, socially, emotionally, spiritually, then none of that other stuff is going to work as well as it should. I mentioned how the arts can drive academic achievement. Project-based learning on our website is one of our core agenda topics, and High Tech High and in San Diego has pushed further than just about anybody else we know in creating a complete project-based curriculum. A project is not just something students do for 3 or 4 weeks at the end of the traditional course. They do it the whole year long. They integrate the humanities and the sciences. They do service learning through their projects. Their students provide a service to their communities. They've created a guide, a student-produced guide to San Diego. If you're ever in San Diego, please look up the High Tech High Guide to San Diego, because high school students probably know the city better than just about anybody else, and know the places that maybe the other tour guides don't look for. I'll just give you one example of how far they've taken project-based learning. One of their teachers went to Tanzania a couple summers ago. And while he was there, he learned from some rangers, park rangers, that they had a problem with poached meat in meat markets in Tanzania. Meat was turning up on the markets. They weren't quite sure where it was coming from. Certainly there are poachers out there killing animals for their hides, for their tusks, killing elephants, whatever it might be. So meat from different animals was showing up in the meat markets, and they didn't quite know what it was. He's a science teacher. He said, you know, I think my students back in San Diego could help you with that. We can buy these inexpensive now DNA testing kits. If you send us the samples of that meat, we will test it and let you know what species of animals they are. So they created this global project to help African park rangers. They communicated that information, and they actually went to Tanzania the next summer and trained, high school students trained the park rangers in how to do this. So that's another piece of this 21st century puzzle, that students can now teach others what they know. That they have these tools, they're good with these tools, they need teachers to help them learn how to use these tools. But once they do that, they can teach each other and they can teach their community. Exposing students to the world of work. This is so important, as that example suggests. Students in high school are learning about the role of African rangers. But what about more broadly, learning about the world of work here in this country? One of the great things we've done in our state is to create a multiple pathways approach to high school. So that high school students not only take courses, and more modern courses, around biotechnology, around the digital arts, industries of vital importance to California. We have a huge entertainment industry, a huge biotechnology industry. But often we're hiring people from other countries to take those jobs. I'll just give you a little insight on that. At Lucasfilm, which makes amazing visual effects and film, sound design, careers that many students would love to work in, we don't have enough colleges and universities producing graduates for these industries. We have 2 HR employees working full-time at Lucasfilm just to hire digital artists from England, Canada, Australia, Singapore, other English-speaking countries. So we want California kids to have those jobs, just as I'm sure you want Tennessee kids to have the jobs that are here in this state. So one of our foundations in California said, we need a new model for high school. And we don't think it exists right now, so we're going to fund it. And it's called Connect Ed California, the California Center for College and Career. The Irvine Foundation invested for them, for anyone really, a substantial investment, about $5 or $6 million a year over 6 years. It came to about $50 million from one foundation, trying to develop this, working with 9 districts in California to prove this model, that from the very beginning, freshmen go out and they go to workplaces. They do the typical field trip. Sophomore year, they begin to shadow professionals during the workday. Junior and senior year, they do internships at these companies in finance, in banking, in digital arts and entertainment, biology, biotech, construction, and on and on. So these are the new career technology academies that we're developing. The good news is, as we were doing this work, I say we because I joined the board of this group, Connect Ed, about 5 years ago. This was during the recession. A lot of cutbacks during the school budgets for 4 or 5 years. And now the California economy is picking up. I'm sure yours is as well. The national economy is picking up. There's money now. And our governor and our state superintendent and our state board said, we have some more money now to invest in K-12. What should we invest in? What would really make a difference? And this slide tells you about a new trust of $250 million That shows you how strongly the California economy is coming back. We've got billions to invest. This is the bet they made. They looked at the 9 districts doing this work. A $50 million investment by a local foundation became a $250 million investment of state money to do this work. So we're very excited about this, and it will really help improve our high schools and our economy as well. I just want to scroll down a bit and give you 5 of my favorite websites that illustrate how technology is really. I'm going to share these slides to you so you don't even have to take notes. Okay? Here's 5 or 6 great websites. Your students can now act as scientists. That's pretty clear. Digital microscopes, one of my favorite, if you get a little inexpensive digital microscope and hook it up to a laptop computer, ask your students how many images of Lincoln are on the penny. We should ask you this. We have more time, we do this. How many images of Lincoln are on the penny? Mostly, well, of course, he's on front, right? Through a digital microscope, your students can put that penny under that microscope and they will see on the backside, oh, there's a Lincoln Memorial. There's a little image, a very, very tiny image of Abraham Lincoln sitting in the Lincoln Memorial that you can see through a digital microscope. We're putting scientific instruments online. Your students can do this project called BugScope. They can collect insects and send them to the University of Illinois, thank you to the National Science Foundation, and schedule time, as you see there, a couple years back. Please check out BugScope. Well, if you just type in BugScope, you'll find it. They can schedule time and talk with graduate students in entomology, or even the professors in entomology. They made a career of studying insects. Talk with them and see the insects they've collected under a scanning electron microscope. We're putting telescopes online so students can do this. We're putting microscopes online. It's one of the great things that technology is doing. Your students can also do species inventory and species migration. Track the path of the monarch butterfly. I'm sure it comes through Tennessee. They can make observations of monarch butterflies during the fall as they're making their way down to Mexico, and then during the spring as they're making their way back up to Canada, to see that these monarchs travel thousands of miles. It's amazing. They can make their observations and log the latitude and longitude on an online database. They can see other students who are doing this all the way from Canada to Mexico. They can go online and talk with students in these other countries, these other states. So again, a great example of how the internet's changing education. And here we made a film about this program called Journey North. And the look on that student's face, that's the look that you want on your students' faces. That look of engagement, of excitement, of observation, as the monarch butterfly emerges from its chrysalis. I'm doing some work with the national parks. We have some great national park sites here. nps.gov/teachers is the new archive of NPS lessons about history, culture, science, and climate change. The national parks will be celebrating their anniversary, their centennial. They started in 1916, and they will turn 100 in 2016. You'll see a lot of publicity about this, kicking off in 2016. Great advertising in New York is going to launch a public communications campaign about a year from now, in the fall of 2015. And education and how youth can learn in our national parks and about our national parks online. You can schedule ranger chats with rangers looking at different species, the history of the Civil War. They can be your co-teachers in this. I just put together this image of Tennessee and your national parks here, including the Great Smokies, of course. Your students can participate in biodiversity studies with the rangers, with other scientists, with the National Geographic in the Great Smokies. You just type in biodiversity, national parks, Great Smokies, you'll see the work that's going on there to create a professional database, a biodiversity inventory of all the species there in the Great Smokies. Invariably, new species are discovered, not just new species that no one had even known about, but new species that are new to the Great Smokies. As climate change increases, the species are migrating, aren't they? We're finding birds, animals, moving around to find the right ecosystem. There you see, by 2009, they had discovered 850 species new to science that we never discovered before, and more than 6,000 that are new to the Great Smoky Mountains. So this is citizen science work of service to the scientific community that your students can do. And of course, made possible by technology, here's a platform, an internet web-based platform called iNaturalist. Your students can take photographs of the species they see. They can try to identify what those species are. Sometimes scientific experts will come on in an activity called a BioBlitz and verify that they've got the right species. Sometimes made into a game where students compete to identify more species. So it's making the learning more engaging. And sometimes it's even making the learning more like a game. Okay, just a couple more websites. Your students can visit the greatest art museums in the world. Google has used the Google Street View technology. Those vehicles with the cameras driving up and down the streets, they put those cameras on bicycles and drove them up and down the galleries of the world's greatest art museums. It used to be 20 art museums, now it's more than 50, 60, 70. You can walk down the gallery of Museum of Modern Art in New York, Versailles in France, the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. And as you're walking up to these works of art, you begin to hear the curator tell you about what you're seeing. You and your students can become curators of the world's art. You can create your collections online, you can share them. So part of this is about students acting as authentic learners, that students can become artists, they can be scientists, they can become art curators, thanks to the resources that we're bringing to them. Chemistry. Chemistry made so compelling through a new website called The Elements by Theodore Gray. The last chemistry course I took was in high school. But when I have spare time now, I go to this website. It's a beautifully produced multimedia website, and you begin to see the relevance of these elements to your own daily life. All of us who are flying on airplanes should know about this element, number 22, titanium, because it's in your airplanes, and you should be thankful for it. The world's lightest and strongest metal. Those of you who are active athletically and skiing or golfing or tennis, it's in some of your sports equipment as well. This is one of my favorite websites too, the Academy of Achievement in Washington, D.C. They were bringing together very distinguished Americans to talk to high school students and tell them their stories of success, to inspire them. And then the Academy of Achievement, about 10 or 15 years ago, had this idea that there's this thing called the internet. We could record these presentations and make them available to the world. So you don't have to be one of these privileged high school students in Washington, D.C. Anyone, anywhere, can learn the stories of George Lucas, Sally Ride, Frank Gehry. And what they learned from these video interviews and the accompanying sort of biographies is how these students, these very accomplished professionals, when they were students, they were just like you. They didn't quite know what they were going to do. George Lucas, if he were in your classroom, think about this. If you're a teacher in high school and there's a kid named George Lucas on the back, he's got probably C's, maybe a D in your class, you think he's not going to amount to much, right? He was not a very engaged student. He went to community college. He's one of the most distinguished graduates of our California community college system. It was the only school he could get into with his grades. And then a couple years later, a friend of his was going to USC and said, why don't you come with me? You like photography, and back then he had a darkroom at home. That's the only inkling of George Lucas today. As a kid, he had a darkroom. He liked images. Back then, it was chemicals. It was very awkward, expensive. And he asked his father, can I go finish college at USC? And his father, who ran a stationery store, a stationery and office furniture store in a small town in the Central Valley of California. George Lucas Sr. said, you're my only son. I want you to come back and run the family business. I think it's good that you finish your college education. There is no way you're going to make a living as a photographer. Okay, I'll go for 2 years and then come back. And most people pick up his story then. It was the first time that Mr. Lucas was in an academic environment where he just excelled. He started to get A's. He had never had that before. He liked using technology. He was always trying to make the technology work better for his films. But at the Academy of Achievement website, you will hear him tell that story. And you will hear him say, you know, I was never very good. Even as a filmmaker, I sometimes ask myself, why am I doing this? That's that quote. My first 6 years as a filmmaker were hopeless. Why am I doing this? Frank Gehry, the architect, failed his first architecture class. Sally Ride, I like her story. I want to pay homage and tribute to Sally Ride as the first American woman in space. When she was a teenager, she wanted to be a professional tennis player. I like to play tennis. It's Wimbledon time. She was so good at tennis, she thought for a moment of becoming a tennis star. And for her and for our country, it's great that she liked science too and became an astronaut. Great ways of learning language now. We just showed the captions in Chinese. How were the captions?
It's good. Actually, faster than the person speaking.
Yeah, they're pretty fast and they're pretty accurate. What percentage accuracy would you say?
Well, I think it's 95%.
95%. Machine translated. It will only get better. It's a great example of how technology can continue to progress. We have all these new ways of learning languages, learning subjects that we thought were hard before. And I know many of you think of other languages perhaps as being hard, especially Chinese, where they use characters. We have new ways of making this more engaging, to learn it more quickly. BBC has put their language learning courses online, and these are taught through a detective kind of mystery drama. Again, using a different format. So, Mi Vida Loca, My Crazy Life. The first episode, I've done this. The first episode, you're in the back of a taxi, and they're teaching you just to converse as you're going from the airport in Madrid to an apartment. They're teaching you just a few words to communicate where you're going. You get to the apartment, your friend is giving you some keys, you go to the apartment, and there's somebody there. You talk with them a little, they teach you a little bit about what to say to that person. A little mystery develops. You go downstairs and something happens in a cafe, and you're off and running. But it makes the learning of language much more exciting. Guru Learning, an educational search engine. You ever use Google and type in search terms, and you don't get back the results you're looking for? Or you have to scroll and scroll and scroll through pages. Guru Learning was developed by an Indian Google engineer. That's why it's called Guru. It's great, and it looks like Google. A search engine for learning that returns the results according to websites and films and video and lesson plans you can use. Wolfram Alpha, a computational search engine. Type in terms into this computational search engines. Right now, a lot of students are, in their geometry class are trying to figure out what is the area or the perimeter of a triangle with these sides. Wolfram Alpha gives you those results immediately. So it makes the point, it's not important to know the answer. It's important to know the process. Gets you to deeper thinking. I'll tell you the area, it's 30. I'll tell you the perimeter, it's 30. Why is it 30? That's what you need to understand. I won't have a lot to say about this, but today's youth can learn in a different way. They can be teaching assistants, where it says students as TAs. They can be teaching assistants for teachers with technology. Let's not burden teachers all the time with the only ones who have to operate the technology. Let's get students involved with that. These digital natives are carrying this change in their own pockets. They have access to information in their pockets 24/7. Let me close with just one simple question. What is your definition of a great school? The key to your answer for this question is make it short, and how would you measure if it was a great school? I was asked this question by Paul Houston, who was head of the Superintendents Association in DC. He said, Milton, I've seen your website. It's great, full of amazing schools. How would you define a great school? And don't just go on and on about it, because we tend to be very verbal in education. Just make it a sentence or two. A very succinct, concise definition. And I said, well, when we go into these schools, it's in the school culture, and the teachers teach as a team. They like to collaborate. The students work on projects. They're doing projects that are authentic, where they know how that project applies to their real lives. And Paul Houston said, well, that's getting a little long. How would you measure that if it was a great school? I said, well, you know, the tests don't measure everything. We're still working on new forms of assessment. We need to, I talked about multiple intelligences, assessments of different intelligence. He said, well, that's also, okay, that's getting a little long too. So Paul Houston told me his definition of a great school, and it's a good one. Do the students run in at the same rate that they run out? That's it. It's one sentence. We could measure this. We could have saved ourselves a lot of time and money under No Child Left Behind if we tried to measure this. Because what this says is the students are eager for learning. They're running into school because they know what they're going to be doing there is engaging, joyful, connects to their personal passions. And then at the end of the school day, they're a little slow to leave. We've seen this also in the schools that we filmed. The bell rings at 3:15, and the parents come in to pick up the kids, and some of the 7th graders say, you know, could you wait a second? I'm working on something here. I'm making a presentation about our project. We're doing some graphics. We're uploading something to a website. So I like this definition, and I encourage you all to think about creating the kinds of schools where students run in at the same rate that they run out, hopefully run in even faster than the rate that they run out at. Let me pause there, and we have a few minutes, just a few minutes. I'm sorry I've gone on a bit. But I'd love to hear any comments or questions, and I'll be around for a bit afterwards and signing some books. Glad to chat some more. But if you have any comments or questions, I'd love to hear them. And I know you've got a full slate of exciting sessions coming up. I just want to know this concept of wait time. You know, I know you're thinking. The teachers ask the question, they expect the answer in 5 seconds. I want to pay tribute to Mary Budd Rowe at the University of Florida, who developed that concept. I want to wait for people to think and reflect. And maybe just 1 or 2 comments, questions? Yes?
I hear a lot of concern about screen time and about electronic media exposure,
Yeah.
Potential negative effects on children. Do you think that that is a real concern, an overblown concern? Where would you fall on the use of media, since you're a proponent
Yes,
of it?
yes, and so this question about screen time, how much time students spend with screens, which is off the charts. I'm someone who's worked in television, and screen time, television time for many years was a real concern also. The figures show that even 20 years ago, kids were spending on average 4 hours a day watching television. That's the average. Some kids were watching 6, 7, 10 hours of television a day to make that average 4. Now we see that students are spending 7 hours a day with their screens. They're multitasking on multiple screens. In fact, they're multitasking about 10 hours of screen time into 7.5 hours a day. That's the average. So of course, I believe that's not healthy. What we want to do, as we want to do with television and all media for many decades, is to have the educational content, the screen time be more educational. Because believe me, they're spending too much time on Facebook. They're spending too much time texting with their friends. So we want to have more of that screen time be educational time. Any other comments or questions? Well, with that, let me thank you for the time to spend some ideas with you and learning more about our work at Edutopia, and I look forward to further conversations with you afterwards. So thank you.
We do have a gift for you. I want you to dig in there and just show everybody what you got. But I do want to say thank you for your words today. Wow. We had a nice opportunity. I know one of our members of our team picked up Milton Chin at the airport last night, and she was wearing a Lipscomb t-shirt to identify who she was. And so we got you
I want the t-shirt.
A Lipscomb t-shirt in there as well, and some other Lipscomb paraphernalia. So we want you to go back to San Francisco.
Oh, great.
There you go. Show us
I'm
your
a big
Lipscomb
fan of the
t-shirt.
bison. I work in the National Park Service, and the bison's our symbol, as it is yours, so thank you.
I want to make a few comments about something that he said that I think will connect to where we're going in the College of Education. One of the reasons why we felt like Milton would be a great speaker for this first summit is we have attempted to integrate a lot of what you talked about, the collaboration piece, looking at technology and integrating it differently. We started the Ayers Institute for Teacher Learning in 2012 that really tries to look at those two pieces differently and professional learning differently. I encourage you to go out to one of the tables that has the Ayers Institute information on it. You will see some flyers about 10 teacher prep MOOCs, massive open source courses that we're putting together for the state of Tennessee. We also have information about our Invest website that has now, I think, 14 videos posted, full-length videos of teachers teaching with using Common Core standards, but also really connecting to the team indicators and rubrics. We have some new videos coming out at the end of the summer. Those are great professional development for yourself and for your staff. And in addition, we have College Access course that has been developed that will be helping counselors look at how do we get more people ready for college, how to fill out the FAFSA, College Fit, how do you get more scholarship money. And those are also for mentors who are working with college students. So I appreciate your comments because we are trying to move in the direction that he has talked about to be a leading edge in education. So let's give Milton another hand. Okay, I'm going to let you go out and get to your books because they're going to be a mad dash out here in just a minute. And so he will have a table out here with his book if you would like to purchase a book and get that signed. That will be out here. We'll also have 2 other people signing books. We have 2 faculty members who just had books that came out. One was around instructional coaching and one is around iPads in the classroom. And so Dr. Thornthwaite and Dr. Morrell will also be out with their books, and I'd love for you to stop by their table and see some of our faculty's work that they are publishing as well. Let me give you a few logistics as we look at the items in your notebook. You do have logistics around the breakout sessions. We will give you about 10 more minutes on this breakout session because we're getting out a little bit short. So leaders of those breakout sessions, if you will let them out around 11:30, and then we'll take a few more minutes into lunch, and so we'll catch up just slightly on time, but that's not a major issue at all. We do have 4 of our Board of Visitors who will be introducing some of the sessions. Our Board of Visitors who will be here today are Lindsay Judd. We're so thrilled to have him here from Good Pasture. Daly Calendine is here, Charles Smith, and Katie Culberson. And so if you see them, tell them hello. They are working as a board that's helping the College of Education think about how we invest in good practice and quality education for our students going forward. And we have just identified that board this past year, and so we're thrilled that some of them are here today. We also will have faculty members you will be interacting with. Their bios are inside your packet, so please look through those and you will learn who is speaking to you, as well as some of our Ayers Institute faculty and staff will be with you. Very, very quickly, bathrooms. Now, I know most of you are alums and you know exactly where those are, but in case you don't, they are all over here and they're on the same place. They're in the same place on all 3 floors. So if for some reason it's being cleaned, you can go down to the next floor and get to the right place. Lunch flow after breakout session, the lunches will be out here. There will be an opportunity for you to pick that up and then come in here with your lunch. And we will have a nice program, and I hope you will stay for lunch in particular because we'll be learning a little bit more about Lipscomb, some things that you may not know through a video, and also we will talk a little bit about advocacy in education and what we can do to better advocate as educators. And finally, there is this nice card from Dr. Lowry inside your folder. It looks like his business card. But if you pull it out and look on the back, it is more than a business card. It is a free cup of Starbucks coffee, any kind you want. So you can get the mocha, latte, chai, whatever you want with this. And so make sure that you hold on to that. At the very end of the day, we want to walk over to Starbucks, give our door prizes, and if you want a tour of some new things on campus, we will certainly give that to you. But more importantly, we'll walk in there and you can get your free coffee. If you don't utilize it today, you can certainly utilize it any day you're on campus and go over and get a free cup of coffee. I think I've covered those logistics, and I look forward to talking with you a little bit more at lunch. So with that, you will be dismissed, and look for your location, and we'll see you in your sessions. Thank you very much.